Obese sisters sold like cattle. Amish man who bought them said, "I'll give you a home." The dusty auction yard falls silent as two trembling sisters are dragged onto the block, their own father shouting they'll be sold like beasts. The crowd laughs, the church bell tolls, and shame burns hotter than the sun overhead. Then a stranger in plain clothes steps forward. He lays down a single silver dollar. His voice cuts through the jeers, "I'll give you a home." But mercy sparks fury, whispers spread in the saloon. The sheriff warns the law won't protect them. And the father returns, clutching papers, vowing to tear his daughters back into chains. Behind every slammed door and every whispered prayer lies a truth too heavy to bury. Once, long ago, these sisters were sold for whiskey. And now that past threatens to shatter their last chance at dignity. Will the bonds of faith and forgiveness be strong enough to break a father's claim? Or will the frontier grind their hope into dust once more? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wagon wheels creaked against the dusty trail as William's team of horses pulled them steadily away from town. Mary and Ruth huddled close together on the wooden seat, their shoulders touching for comfort. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado foothills, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold. Mary's hands trembled as she gripped her worn shawl tighter. The memory of their father's slurred voice still rang in her ears, the way he'd shouted about selling them like livestock. Her chest felt hollow, even though they'd escaped that nightmare. She stole a glance at their rescuer, studying his steady profile. William Yoder sat straight-backed, his broad shoulders relaxed as he guided the horses. His dark beard and plain black hat marked him as different from the rough miners and traders they'd known all their lives. His hands, calloused from honest work, held the reins with gentle firmness. Ruth shifted beside her sister, breaking the silence. "Thank you, Mr. Yoder," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wagon's creaks. We don't know how to repay your kindness." William turned slightly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "There is no debt between us. The Lord teaches us to help those in need." His voice was deep and steady, like the distant roll of summer thunder. Mary's defenses rose instantly. "We ain't charity cases?" she said sharply, then bit her lip, regretting her tone. But years of mockery and their father's neglect had taught her to expect cruelty behind every kind gesture. "No," William agreed simply. "You are children of God, same as any other." He clicked softly to the horses as they started up a gentle rise. "My home is modest, but there's plenty of room. Good soil for gardens, if you've a mind for growing things." Ruth's eyes brightened at that. "I love gardening," she said softly. "Used to grow herbs in tin cans behind Pa's wagon when we could." The mention of their father made Mary's jaw clench. She could still see him swaying on his feet in the town square, gambling away what little they had, then deciding to sell his own daughters when the money ran dry. The crowd's laughter still burned in her ears. William seemed to sense her tension. "The past is heavy," he said carefully, "but we need not carry it forever. Each sunrise brings new mercy." The wagon rounded a bend, revealing a neat homestead nestled against the foothills. A simple whitewashed house stood solid against the darkening sky, with a barn and corral off to one side. A kitchen garden spread out behind the house, and the sisters could see rows of corn swaying in the evening breeze. "It ain't much," William said as he guided the horses into the yard, "but it's peaceful here." Mary felt tears prick at her eyes, though she fought them back. How long had it been since they'd seen a real home? Years of sleeping in their father's wagon, moving from town to town as his debts and reputation caught up with them, had worn them down to bare survival. Ruth reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes. They were together, they were safe, and maybe, just maybe, they could believe in kindness again. William brought the wagon to a gentle stop. "Let's get you settled before dark," he said, climbing down. He offered his hand first to Ruth, then to Mary, helping them step down with quiet dignity. No mockery in his eyes, no judgment of their size or circumstances, just simple human decency. The sisters stood close together, taking in their surroundings. The air smelled of sage and pine, so different from the stench of whiskey and unwashed bodies they'd grown used to. A cool breeze carried the sweet scent of William's garden, where tomatoes ripened on the vine and beans climbed tall poles. "The house needs a woman's touch," William admitted as he led them towards the door. "Lost my Sarah and our little one to fever 3 years past." His voice held old grief, but no bitterness. "Been just me since then." Mary felt something shift in her heart at his words. This man knew loss too, knew what it was to be alone. Yet he'd chosen kindness over bitterness, mercy over hardness. As they stepped onto the porch, the last rays of sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. The same sun that had witnessed their humiliation now blessed their first steps toward a new life. Ruth's fingers found Mary's again, squeezing gently. In that touch was a lifetime of shared pain, but also a spark of something new. Hope, fragile as a spring seedling, but ready to grow. The wagon rattled and swayed along the dirt road, kicking up dust in the fading light. Purple shadows stretched across the valley as the sun melted behind jagged mountain peaks. Mary and Ruth sat rigid on the wooden seat, their bodies tense despite the gentle motion of the wagon. William cleared his throat softly. "The good Lord provides shelter for all his creatures," he said, his voice carrying over the creak of wagon wheels. "You'll find peace here, in time." Mary's fingers dug into her skirts, her expression guarded. Ruth darted nervous glances at their rescuer, trying to read his intentions in the growing darkness. They had learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with hidden costs. The wagon wound through stands of towering pines, their branches whispering overhead. The sweet scent of sap mixed with evening coolness, so different from the sour whiskey stench that had followed their father. After what felt like hours, a warm glow appeared through the trees. "Home?" William said simply, guiding the horses around a final bend. A golden rectangle of lantern light spilled from the windows of a modest wooden house. Though plain, it stood solid and well-maintained, with neat stacks of firewood along one wall. A weathered barn rose to their right, and beyond it spread a fenced garden patch where corn stalks stood like sentinels in the twilight. William helped them down from the wagon, his calloused hands strong but gentle. He led them up 3 wooden steps to the door, which opened into a tidy kitchen. A black wood stove dominated one wall, while simple curtains framed the windows. Everything was clean, if worn with honest use. "Make yourselves comfortable," William said, hanging his hat on a peg. He moved with quiet efficiency, striking a match to light the stove and pulling ingredients from a cupboard. "Supper won't take long." The sisters perched uncertainly on a bench, watching as he worked. Soon, savory smells filled the kitchen. Beef stew thick with vegetables, and golden cornbread baking in a cast-iron skillet. When William set 3 earthenware bowls on the table, Mary and Ruth exchanged startled looks. Their father had rarely shared meals with them, preferring to eat first while they waited. "Please," William gestured to the table. "Eat while it's hot." The stew was simple, but filling, the cornbread still warm from the oven. William bowed his head in silent prayer before eating, but didn't force them to join. He ate steadily, neither rushing nor lingering, and asked no questions that might make them uncomfortable. After the dishes were washed, William lit a lamp and showed them up a narrow staircase. "This will be your room," he said, opening a door to reveal a small but clean bedroom. 2 narrow beds stood against opposite walls, each covered with a carefully patched quilt. A wooden chest between them held extra blankets. "The door has a latch," he pointed out quietly. "You're safe here. I'll sleep in the barn loft. The house is yours tonight." With a small nod, he left them alone, his boots creaking down the stairs. Mary and Ruth stood frozen until they heard the front door close. Then Ruth burst into tears, muffling her sobs against Mary's shoulder. They changed quickly into their threadbare nightgowns, then huddled together on one bed, trembling despite the warm night. "What if he's like the others?" Ruth whispered, clutching Mary's hand. "What if he expects?" "Hush now," Mary squeezed back, though her own heart raced. "He seems different. Did you see how he treated us at supper? Like we were real people, not just mouths to feed? He gave us a whole room." Ruth's voice held wonder. "With real beds." "And he's sleeping in the barn," Mary added softly. Maybe he means what he says. Maybe the Lord really did send him to help us." They lay awake long into the night, whispering their fears and tiny hopes until exhaustion finally pulled them into uneasy sleep. The strange creaks and settling sounds of the house made them start awake more than once, but each time they found themselves still safe, still together. Before dawn, the sharp crack of an axe splitting wood pulled them from sleep. Ruth crept to the window, while Mary watched anxiously from the bed. Through the grey morning light, they could see William already at work, steadily chopping firewood. His breath steamed in the chill air as he paused to wipe his brow, then returned to his task without complaint. Wood smoke drifted up from the kitchen chimney, promising warmth below. The sisters looked at each other, uncertainty warring with desperate hope in their eyes. This morning would show whether William's kindness was truly genuine, or if their newfound safety was just another cruel dream waiting to shatter. Dawn's first light filtered through the kitchen windows as William stirred a pot of bubbling oatmeal. The wooden floorboards creaked softly as Mary and Ruth descended the stairs, their steps hesitant. The simple kitchen table had already been set with 3 bowls and a pitcher of fresh milk. "Good morning," William said, his voice gentle. "I trust you slept well." He ladled steaming oatmeal into their bowls, the wholesome aroma filling the room. The sisters nodded, settling onto the bench. They watched as William bowed his head in silent prayer before picking up his spoon. The oatmeal was thick and creamy, sweetened with a drizzle of honey. For several minutes, only the quiet clink of spoons filled the kitchen. "If you don't mind my asking," William said carefully, "what skills do you bring?" "Every hand has worth in God's sight, and work shared makes life lighter." Mary twisted her napkin. I can cook some. Pa never liked my food much, but she makes wonderful pies." Ruth interrupted, defending her sister. "And her bread, when we had flour, was always good." William nodded approvingly. The kitchen could use a woman's touch. He turned to Ruth. "And you?" "I kept a little garden once," Ruth said softly. "Behind the boarding house where we stayed. Just some beans and tomatoes, but they grew well enough." "Praise be," William said. "My garden needs tending, and I'd welcome the help." He gathered their empty bowls, setting them in the wash basin. "Would you like to learn more?" "Both of you." The sisters exchanged uncertain glances, unused to being asked their preferences. Mary nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, if you're willing to teach us." "William," he corrected gently. "We're family now, in God's eyes. Come, I'll show you." He led Ruth out to the vegetable patch while Mary stayed behind to help with the breakfast dishes. The morning sun warmed their backs as William demonstrated how to mend the broken rows, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy through the soil. "See here," he showed Ruth how to prop up a fallen tomato plant. "Everything needs support to grow strong." His words carried deeper meaning, but he didn't press it. Inside, William taught Mary the basics of bread making. Her fingers trembled as she kneaded the dough, afraid of making mistakes. But William's patience never wavered, and soon the kitchen filled with the promising smell of rising bread. "Too much flour," Mary fretted, dusting white powder from her apron. "No matter," William assured her. "The bread will taste just fine." To their surprise, it did. As they worked together, the tension in their shoulders slowly eased. When Ruth knocked over a bucket while weeding, William simply helped her right it. When Mary's first loaf came out slightly burned, he praised its texture instead. The simple acceptance of their efforts, without mockery or anger, felt foreign yet wonderful. By afternoon, Ruth had learned to identify the different vegetables, while Mary had mastered the rhythm of kneading. At one point, flour dusted Mary's nose, making Ruth giggle. The sound of their shared laughter echoed through the kitchen, a sound neither sister could remember making in years. As evening approached, William lit a lamp and retrieved a worn leather Bible from a shelf. Its pages were well thumbed, with German text alongside English. He opened it carefully, the lamplight casting warm shadows across the pages. "Would you mind if I read?" he asked. At their nods, he began in his steady voice. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The familiar words took on new meaning in the peaceful kitchen, speaking of mercy and refuge. The sisters listened, Ruth's eyes bright with hope, while Mary's remained cautious. William's deep voice carried the ancient promises of comfort, without demanding their response. When he finished reading, he bid them good night and retired to the barn as before. Alone in their room, the sisters whispered in the darkness. Through the open window came the evening sounds of crickets and distant coyote calls. "He seems truly kind," Ruth ventured, her voice barely audible, "like he means everything he says about God's love and mercy." Mary pulled their quilt tighter, troubled. "Maybe so. But what if Pa comes back? He won't let us be, you know that. He never has before. But William's different from the others who tried to help us." Ruth insisted. "I want to believe we're safe here. Don't you feel it too?" Mary was quiet for a long moment, listening to the coyote's mournful song. "I want to," she admitted finally. "Lord, help me. I want to believe it so bad it hurts. But I'm scared to hope, Ruth. Hoping's what breaks you in the end." Ruth reached across the darkness between their beds, finding Mary's hand. They held tight to each other, as they had through so many other nights of uncertainty. But this time, the darkness felt different, touched with possibility instead of just fear. 2 days passed in peaceful routine before William announced they needed supplies. The early morning sun had barely cleared the mountaintops when he hitched his team to the wagon. Mary and Ruth sat stiffly on the wooden seat, their shoulders tense as the homestead disappeared behind them. The closer they got to town, the more the sisters drew together. The wagon wheels creaked over packed dirt as they approached the main street, where curious faces peered from shop windows. Ruth pulled her shawl tighter, while Mary stared straight ahead, her jaw set against the whispers that followed them. "Pay them no mind," William said quietly, guiding the horses to a halt before the mercantile. The hitching post still bore knife marks from their father's drunken carving sprees. Mary flinched at the sight. Inside the store, the floorboards groaned beneath their feet. The shopkeeper's bell jangled, drawing every eye their way. William moved with calm purpose, selecting flour and sugar while the sisters stayed close behind him. Their plain dresses, borrowed from William's deceased wife's trunk, marked them as different from the town women in their colourful calicos. A group of men lounged near the seed bins, their voices carrying deliberately loud. "Ain't natural, him hiding them women out there. Must have sin in mind. Guess even plain folk get lonely." Another added with a snicker. A woman in a purple bonnet whispered to her friend, not bothering to lower her voice. "Those girls are too large to be any real help. They'll eat him out of house and home." William's steady hands never faltered as he measured lamp oil into a tin container. He placed items in his basket with the same care he showed at home, acting as if the cruel words were merely wind through prairie grass. Ruth's eyes glistened, but she followed William's example, helping him count out coffee beans. Mary stood guard beside her sister, her shoulders squared against the mockery they'd known all their lives. The store's relative peace shattered when heavy boots stumbled across the porch. The batwing doors crashed open, revealing their father's unshaven face, his eyes bloodshot from the saloon. "Thief!" he roared, pointing a shaking finger at William. "You stole my property! Them's my daughters!" William set down his basket carefully. "Friend, thee is not well. Go home and sleep it off." "Don't you friend me, you plain-dressed hypocrite!" Their father lurched forward, whiskey fumes preceding him. "You ain't got no right to my girls!" The sheriff's boots thumped on the porch, drawn by the commotion. He stepped between the men, one hand resting on his gun belt. "That's enough noise for one morning." Their father's face twisted into a cunning smile. "Sheriff, this here Amish done stole my daughters. Ask anyone who saw. He bought 'em illegal, like slaves." The sheriff's weathered face grew stern. "William Yoder, that true. I gave a $1 to spare them public shame." William answered evenly. "They came of their own free will. That ain't a legal transaction." The sheriff shook his head. "Can't buy and sell people, even with good intentions. This could make trouble." Their father's triumphant laugh sent chills down Mary's spine. "You hear that? They're coming home with me. Just wait till I get my hands on you, ungrateful." "No!" Ruth's cry surprised everyone, including herself. She grabbed Mary's arm. "Please, we won't go back." "We can't." The sheriff raised his hands. Now. Nobody's going anywhere today, but this needs sorting proper-like." He fixed William with a meaningful look. "Best get your business done and head home, all of you." William nodded gravely. He paid for their supplies while their father continued shouting threats from the street. The sisters huddled close as William loaded the wagon, their father's words following them down the dusty street. "I'll get you back. Mark my words." The return journey passed in tense silence. Mary and Ruth pressed together on the seat, jumping at every sudden sound from the surrounding woods. Even the familiar sight of William's homestead brought little comfort, haunted by their father's threats and the sheriff's warning. That evening, William served a quiet supper of beans and cornbread. The sisters picked at their food, exchanging worried glances across the table. The lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and every creak of the cabin made them start. William set down his fork. "You need not fear," he said simply. "God's hand brought you here. He will not abandon you now." But as night settled over the homestead, worry still lingered in the sisters' eyes. They lay awake long after William had retired to the barn, the sheriff's words echoing in their minds. Can't buy and sell people, even with good intentions. For the first time since their rescue, the darkness felt threatening again, filled with memories of their father's rages and the law's cold judgment. The promise of safety in their new home suddenly seemed as fragile as morning frost. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting William's homestead in soft, golden light. The morning air hung heavy with unspoken worry as the sisters emerged from their room, their eyes seeking reassurance in William's steady presence. He stood at the wood stove, stirring a pot of porridge with the same unhurried movements they'd come to know. "We'll work as we always do," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "The Lord's way is steady and true." Mary's hands twisted in her apron. "But what if—" "Until matters resolve," William continued gently, "we tend to what's before us." He ladled porridge into 3 bowls, adding a dollop of honey to each. "Ruth, the garden needs weeding and watering. Mary, there's mending to be done, and meals to prepare." The sisters exchanged glances, finding comfort in the ordinary tasks he set before them. After breakfast, Ruth followed William to the vegetable patch, where morning dew still clung to the leaves. He showed her which plants needed attention, his weathered hands demonstrating how to grip weeds at their base. "Pull slow and steady," he instructed. "Like this." The weed came free, roots and all. Ruth nodded, kneeling in the soft earth to copy his movements. Inside, Mary sorted through a basket of clothes needing repair. Her thick fingers, usually so clumsy with shame, found purpose in the simple rhythm of needle and thread. Through the open window, she could hear Ruth humming as she worked, a sound she hadn't heard in years. The morning passed in peaceful industry. Ruth's shoulders relaxed as she tended the growing things, while Mary found satisfaction in making torn things whole again. The familiar weight of worry began to lift, replaced by the simple pleasure of work well done. As afternoon shadows lengthened, William called them to the kitchen. "Time you learned about flour?" he said, opening a barrel of wheat. He showed them how to feed kernels into the hand-cranked mill, explaining how the stones turned grain to powder. "Like this?" Mary asked, turning the handle with careful attention. "Yeah, just so." William nodded. "Now we'll make bread." He demonstrated how to measure flour, add yeast, and mix water until the dough came together. The sisters watched intently as his strong hands kneaded the mass on the floured table. "Your turn," he said, stepping back. Ruth plunged her hands into the dough, first, giggling at the sticky texture. Mary joined more cautiously, but soon both sisters were working the dough together, flour dusting their faces and hair. A laugh bubbled up from Ruth as she wiped her powdered cheek, leaving another streak of white. Mary caught the joy in her sister's eyes and began laughing too, a rich, warm sound that filled the kitchen. William watched from his place by the stove, his eyes crinkling at the corners, treasuring the moment of pure happiness in his usually quiet home. After supper, as William cleared away the plates, he paused. "I want you to know something," he said, his voice low and serious. "No harm will come to you here. I give you my word before God." The sisters saw the truth of it in his steady gaze. This wasn't just a promise, it was a covenant. Later that night, in their small bedroom, Mary and Ruth knelt beside their bed. Their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining as they had so many times before. But this time was different. "Should we?" Ruth whispered. "Should we pray?" Mary squeezed her sister's hand. It had been years since they'd dared speak to God, years since they'd believed he listened. But now, in this safe place, the words came hesitantly. "Dear God," Ruth began, her voice trembling. Please keep us safe." Mary continued, when Ruth faltered. "Please don't let them take us away." Their whispered prayer rose in the quiet room, simple and sincere, while crickets chirped their evening song outside the window. Out on the porch, William sat in his wooden chair, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. His mind wrestled with the challenge before him: how to protect the sisters while staying true to his Amish beliefs of non-violence and peace. The evening breeze carried the soft murmur of the sisters' prayer to his ears. His heart lifted at this sign of healing, even as his thoughts turned to the threats that still lurked in town. He had promised them safety, and he would keep that promise, though he didn't yet know how. The stars continued their slow dance across the heavens as William sat in contemplation, crickets singing in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called into the night. The summer sun beat down on William's homestead as hoofbeats approached along the dusty road. Mary was kneading bread dough, while Ruth chopped vegetables when they heard the distinctive clip-clop of a horse drawing near. Through the kitchen window, they spotted the circuit preacher's black coat and wide-brimmed hat. William stepped out onto the porch to greet him, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Good morning, preacher." The preacher remained mounted, looking down at William with stern disapproval. "Brother Yoda, I've heard disturbing reports about your situation here. Would you care to step down? Take some water?" William offered quietly. The preacher dismounted but didn't move toward the porch. "I come with concerns, Brother Yoda. The town speaks of disorder in your household. 2 unmarried women living under your roof. This is not God's way." From the kitchen, Mary and Ruth could hear every word. Mary's hands stilled in the dough, while Ruth's knife paused mid-chop. Shame colored their cheeks as they listened. "With respect, preacher," William's steady voice carried through the window, "I follow God's command to care for those in need. As James writes, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction." "You twist scripture to justify impropriety," the preacher warned. "These women were sold at auction. They bring scandal to dash. They were abandoned," William interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. "The Lord says, 'Defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy.' Psalm 82, verse 3. Inside the kitchen, Ruth reached for Mary's flour-covered hand. Their eyes met, filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. The preacher shifted his weight, uncomfortable but determined. "Brother Yoda, I warn you, God does not bless disorderly households. The town already whispers." "Then let them whisper," William said quietly. "I answer to God, not gossip." After several tense moments, the preacher remounted his horse. "I pray you'll reconsider this arrangement," he said stiffly, before turning his horse back toward town. William watched until the preacher disappeared around the bend. Then he came into the kitchen, where the sisters stood frozen by the window. "You are not a burden," he told them gently. "You are a blessing to this house." That Sunday morning, William hitched up his wagon early. The sisters emerged from their room wearing their best dresses, though both showed signs of wear. "We're going to church?" Ruth asked nervously. William nodded. "We'll worship together, as a household should." The small white church came into view as they crested the hill. Already other wagons and horses clustered around it. As William helped the sisters down from the wagon, heads turned and whispers started. "Brought his auction prizes to church." "Shameful display. Those poor benches won't hold." William walked tall between the sisters, guiding them through the whispers to a pew near the back. The wooden bench creaked as they settled in, causing more snickers from nearby congregants. As the first hymn began, Mary stared at her lap, face burning. But then she heard William's clear voice singing beside them, unashamed. Slowly, hesitantly, she joined in, her voice barely above a whisper. Ruth bowed her head in prayer, tears slipping down her cheeks. Throughout the service, the sisters felt the weight of stares and judgment. When the final hymn ended, they hurried outside, but not before overhearing 2 women near the door. Mark my words, he'll regret taking them in. No good can come of it." The ride home was quiet, the sisters lost in their thoughts until William pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Inside, he placed his well-worn Bible on the kitchen table and turned to face them. "I heard their words too," he said softly, "but listen to me now. Your worth isn't measured by town gossip. It's measured by God's mercy, which is new every morning." Ruth wiped her eyes with her sleeve, while Mary stared at her hands, twisted in her skirt. "The Lord sees past our outer shell to the heart within," William continued. "And I see two hearts here, ready to bloom if given the chance to grow in good soil." The kitchen filled with afternoon sunlight as his words settled over them. For the first time since that terrible day at the auction block, the sisters felt truly seen, not for their size or their shame, but for who they were in God's eyes. Mary straightened her shoulders slightly, while Ruth managed a watery smile. William's quiet defense before both preacher and congregation had shown them something precious. That perhaps they were worthy of protection after all. The July sun climbed higher each day, baking the Colorado earth beneath its fierce gaze. Yet on William's homestead, life had settled into a gentle rhythm that seemed to soften even the harshest heat. Each morning, William rose before dawn, his footsteps in the yard as regular as a heartbeat, while he tended to the animals and worked the land. Inside the kitchen, Mary's confidence grew with each loaf of bread she shaped. Her hands, once uncertain, now moved with purpose through the familiar motions of kneading and folding. The yeasty smell of baking bread filled the house daily, warming the rooms with more than just heat from the wood stove. Out in the garden, Ruth discovered joy in coaxing life from the soil. She spent hours among the neat rows, pulling weeds and whispering encouragement to the tender shoots. William had shown her how to stake the climbing beans and thin the carrots, and under her careful attention, the garden flourished like never before. One particularly sunny afternoon, Ruth stood in the garden, her apron gathered up to hold her very first harvest of cucumbers. The green vegetables nestled in the fabric like precious gems, their skin still dusted with earth. Her face glowed with pride as William approached to inspect her work. "These are fine specimens," he said, lifting one to examine it. "You have a gift with growing things, Ruth." Ruth's cheeks flushed pink at his praise, and she ducked her head shyly. "The Lord bless the garden," she murmured. William nodded thoughtfully, still holding the cucumber. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should share these blessings with our neighbors. What would you think about hosting a gathering here?" Mary, who had come to the garden door to listen, caught her breath. Ruth's eyes widened. "A gathering?" Mary asked hesitantly. "Here, yes," William replied. "We could clear the barn, set up tables, share food and fellowship." The sisters exchanged uncertain glances, but there was a spark of excitement beneath their nervousness. They had never hosted anything before. The next day brought a flurry of preparation. Ruth harvested the ripest vegetables, string beans hanging like green jewels, yellow summer squash, and more cucumbers. Her basket overflowed with the garden's bounty. In the kitchen, Mary worked from sunrise, her hands sure and steady as she rolled out pie crusts. The scent of apple and berry pies drifted across the yard, where William hung lanterns from the barn rafters. As evening approached, the sisters' nervousness returned. They changed into their best dresses, Mary smoothing Ruth's hair with trembling fingers. "What if no one comes?" Ruth whispered, but their fears proved unfounded. Just as the sun began to set, the first wagon rattled up the drive, then another and another. William greeted each arrival with quiet dignity, directing them to the barn where tables had been set up. At first, the townspeople moved cautiously, eyeing the food with uncertainty. But the sweet aroma of fresh-baked pies proved irresistible. The first tentative bites led to murmurs of appreciation. Mary's cheeks colored with pleasure as she watched people return for seconds of her apple pie. "This squash is perfectly tender," one woman commented to Ruth, who could barely stammer out a thank you. As people ate and talked, the atmosphere in the barn warmed like rising bread. Laughter began to bubble up here and there, replacing the usual whispers and snickers the sisters were accustomed to hearing. For the first time, they saw genuine smiles directed their way instead of mocking grins. In the soft glow of the lanterns, William stood and opened his Bible. The conversations quieted as he read in his clear, steady voice. "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you." The words settled over the gathering like a gentle blanket. Mary noticed Mrs. Peterson, who had once called them useless, nodding thoughtfully. The blacksmith's wife, who had avoided looking at them in town, actually smiled at Ruth while asking about her garden techniques. The lanterns burned late into the night, casting warm circles of light in the barn as neighbors lingered over last bites of pie and final cups of coffee. Ruth's vegetables had been eaten down to the last bean, and only crumbs remained of Mary's pies. The sisters stood together near the barn door, watching the scene with wonder. "They're actually talking to us," Ruth whispered to Mary, "like we're real people." Mary squeezed her sister's hand, feeling a fragile hope unfurling in her chest. Perhaps William had been right. Perhaps there was a place for them here, after all, not as objects of scorn, but as valued members of the community. The morning after the gathering dawned bright and hopeful. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Mary swept the wooden floors, humming an old hymn tune. The broom's gentle swish kept rhythm with her song, while dust motes danced in the golden light. Even the routine task felt lighter today, touched by memories of neighbors' smiles and kind words from the night before. In the garden, Ruth knelt in the soft earth, making notes in a small tablet William had given her. Her pencil moved across the paper as she sketched out plans for the next planting season. "We could put carrots here," she murmured to herself, "and maybe try those sugar peas William mentioned." The peaceful morning shattered at midday. The sharp sound of hoofbeats approached down the dirt road, growing louder until a horse and rider appeared. Mary's hand stilled on the broom as she peered through the window. Ruth stood up from her garden patch, shading her eyes. Their father sat astride a borrowed horse, his face set in grim lines. For once his eyes were clear of whiskey's fog, which somehow made him more frightening. Dust coated his boots and pants as he dismounted, clutching a leather folder of papers. "Where's that Amish fellow?" he bellowed, striding into the yard. His voice carried the same bitter edge they remembered, even without the slur of drink. William emerged from the barn, his movements unhurried and deliberate. "Can I help you?" The father thrust the papers forward. "Got here legal documents saying them girls is mine by right. Sheriff's gonna enforce it too, soon as I show him." Mary and Ruth drew closer together near the garden gate, their earlier joy crumbling like dry earth. Ruth's tablet fell forgotten among the vegetables. "I cannot accept that claim," William said, his voice calm but firm. "They are free women, not property to be owned." "Law's the law." Their father's face reddened. "And the law says a father has rights to his children. You stole them from me, and I mean to have them back." He jabbed a finger toward his daughters, making them flinch. "You hear that, girls? Pack up whatever foolishness you got here. You're coming home where you belong." Mary's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "This is our home now." Their father's laugh held no warmth. "We'll see what the sheriff has to say about that." He swung back onto his horse, fixing William with a hard stare. "Expect to see him tomorrow." With that, he wheeled the horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. William gathered the sisters at the kitchen table, where morning's bread still sat cooling. "His papers are lies," he said quietly, "and lies cannot stand in God's light." "But what if—" Ruth's voice quavered. "What if the sheriff believes him?" "Then we will speak truth," William answered. "Trust in the Lord's protection." As evening approached, dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them the smell of rain. William looked up at the gathering storm. "We should secure the barn," he said. Together they worked quickly, William and Mary stacking hay bales away from the walls, while Ruth helped gather loose tools. They had just finished when the first heavy drops fell, quickly becoming a downpour that drummed against the barn's roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn's interior in brief, stark bursts. Thunder followed, making the walls shudder. Ruth pressed close to her sister as another bolt lit up the sky. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. "Not now, when people are finally seeing us as more than just those fat sisters everyone laughs at." Mary wrapped an arm around her. "Yesterday Mrs. Peterson asked for my pie recipe," she said softly. "First time anyone's ever wanted to learn something from me." William took his Bible from his coat pocket and found a page by lantern light. His steady voice rose above the storm's fury. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea." The sisters listened, drawing comfort from the familiar words. Outside, rain continued to pour, and lightning split the sky. But inside the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and the warmth of each other's presence, they found a moment of peace despite their fears. The storm raged on, matching the turmoil in their hearts. Yet William's voice never wavered as he continued reading, an anchor in the tempest. They stayed there together, a small family forged by choice rather than blood, while nature's fury spent itself against the barn's sturdy walls. 2 days after the storm, hoofbeats echoed down the dirt road again. This time, the sheriff's badge glinted in the morning sun as he rode up to William's homestead. The sisters watched from behind the kitchen curtain as William walked out to meet him, his plain black hat held respectfully in his hands. "Morning, William," the sheriff said, dismounting with a creak of leather. He pulled a folder of papers from his saddlebag, his weathered face grim. "Got some matters need discussing?" Mary and Ruth stepped onto the porch, drawn by the weight of the moment. The summer breeze carried the scent of Ruth's flourishing garden, a bitter contrast to the scene unfolding before them. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Their father brought these papers round my office." He held up the documents, squinting at them in the bright light. "Claims legal guardianship. Unless you can prove otherwise, I'll have to see them surrendered to his custody." William stood straight, his quiet dignity unchanged. "These women were sold like cattle," he said. "That cannot stand right with the law." "Maybe not," the sheriff agreed, "but without proof of guardianship on your part." He let the words hang in the dusty air. Ruth stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Please, Sheriff, don't make us go back. He'll just sell us again." Mary joined her sister. "We found a real home here, for the first time in years." The sheriff studied them, then looked back at William. "You being Amish, I reckon you won't resort to violence to keep them?" "No," William said firmly. "That is not our way. But neither will I stand idle while injustice is done." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of meadowlarks. Finally, the sheriff tucked the papers back in his saddlebag. "I'll give you a week," he said. 7 days to sort this matter proper. After that—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. They watched him ride away, dust rising behind his horse's hooves. The sisters' shoulders slumped as if a physical weight pressed upon them. That evening, William gathered them for prayer in the kitchen. Lamplight cast long shadows on the walls as he bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed, his voice steady, "grant us wisdom in this trial. Show us the path through darkness and give us strength to walk it." The sisters echoed his "Amen," but their voices quavered. When William set out bowls of stew, the food sat nearly untouched. Mary pushed pieces of potato around her bowl while Ruth stared at her plate, fear having stolen their appetite. "Try to eat," William encouraged gently. "Tomorrow will need strength." Dawn had barely touched the mountains when William hitched up the wagon the next morning. The sisters stood in the yard, anxiety evident in their twisted aprons and worried faces. "I'm going to town," he explained, "to speak with the clerk's office. Stay here and tend to your work. It will help pass the time." They watched until the wagon disappeared around the bend. The day stretched endless before them. Mary attacked her chores with desperate energy, scrubbing floors already clean, while Ruth pulled weeds with such force she nearly uprooted good plants too. The sun crawled across the sky. Every distant sound made them start, fearing their father's return. They worked until their hands ached, trying to keep dark thoughts at bay. Finally, as the sun touched the western peaks, they heard wagon wheels. William appeared, looking weary but composed. His clothes were dusty from the long day in town, but his eyes held calm purpose. The sisters rushed to meet him as he climbed down from the wagon. "What news?" Mary asked, while Ruth gripped her sister's arm. William led them to the kitchen table, where they sat in the fading light. "There may be hope," he said carefully. "The clerk remembers rumors from years back about your father selling you before. If we can find witnesses to testify to that sale, it would void his current claim." "The McClintock sisters," Mary whispered. "They were there that day, in the marketplace." "And old Mr. Peterson," Ruth added. "He tried to stop father, I remember." William nodded. Such testimony could turn the law against him. But we must pray these people will speak truth, even against threats. The sisters exchanged glances, hope warring with fear in their eyes. Ruth's hand found Mary's under the table, squeezing tight. The kitchen grew darker as twilight deepened outside, but William didn't light the lamp yet. They sat together in the gathering dusk, each lost in thought about the days ahead. "Whatever comes," William said softly, "know that God sees your worth, even when others do not." The days crept by like molasses in winter. William kept the sisters busy from sunup to sundown, knowing that idle hands bred worried minds. In the garden, Ruth pressed bean seeds into the dark soil, whispering prayers over each one. The repetitive motion of planting helped steady her trembling fingers. Inside the kitchen, Mary attacked the bread dough with particular vigor. The steady thump of her kneading echoed through the house as she worked out her fears in the stretching and folding. Flour dusted her arms up to her elbows, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "Careful there," William said gently, passing through with an armload of firewood. "The bread ain't done you no harm." Mary's hands stilled. "Sometimes I reckon if I work hard enough, I can forget what's coming." William stacked the wood beside the stove. "The Lord sees your struggle. Keep your hands busy and your heart lifted up." Around noon, the clip-clop of horse hooves drew their attention. Ruth peered through the window, her heart jumping until she recognized Mrs. Harper's wagon approaching. The kindly widow often stopped by, and today she carried a basket over one arm as she made her way to the door. "Something smells mighty fine in here," Mrs. Harper called out as she entered. Her eyes crinkled warmly at the sisters. "Is that your apple pie I detect, Mary?" Mary nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just pulled it from the oven, ma'am." Your pies are becoming famous clear across the county, Mrs. Harper said, settling herself at the kitchen table. Makes me remember my own mama's baking. William joined them, pouring cups of coffee. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. Mrs. Harper's face grew serious as she wrapped her weathered hands around her cup. I came today with purpose, she said. I heard about your trouble with that father of yours. She looked directly at the sisters. And I aim to help. Ruth's hands twisted in her apron. How might you do that, Mrs. Harper? By speaking truth, the widow said firmly. I remember clear as day, 3 years back, your father stumbling out of Whitaker's saloon. He was boasting loud enough for the whole street to hear about how he'd traded his daughters for whiskey money. She shook her head. Made my blood run cold, it did. Mary's face had gone pale. You'd testify to that, before the sheriff? Indeed I would. Mrs. Harper's chin lifted. Some men in town might be scared of your father's temper, but I fear only the Lord above. And he commands us to defend the helpless. William's quiet voice carried weight. We're much obliged, Mrs. Harper. Your testimony could turn the tide. It's the Christian thing to do, she said simply, rising to leave. Those papers he's waving about ain't worth the ink they're printed with, if you ask me. After Mrs. Harper left, hope flickered stronger in the homestead. That evening, as crickets began their nightly chorus, the sisters sat on the porch steps. Stars pricked through the darkening sky one by one, like tiny holes in a black quilt. Do you think he could change? Ruth asked softly. If he saw how wrong he was? Mary's face hardened. A leopard don't change its spots, Ruth. He's made his choices time and again. But with God, all things are possible. Ruth persisted. Remember how the preacher spoke of Paul's conversion? Paul wasn't a drunk who sold his children, Mary said bitterly. William's boots scraped on the wooden boards as he joined them. The question of forgiveness is between you and the Lord, he said. For now, we must trust in his justice. The sisters fell silent, each lost in thought. The night air carried the scent of Ruth's newly turned earth and Mary's cooling pies. A whippoorwill called from the darkness, its lonely song echoing their uncertainty. Whatever happens, William continued, remember that your worth comes not from any man's judgment, but from your Creator. Ruth leaned her head against Mary's shoulder. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, Mary admitted, squeezing her sister's hand. That night, sleep came fitfully to the sisters. They tossed and turned, their dreams filled with sheriff's badges and legal papers, their father's angry face, and Mrs. Harper's determined testimony. The thin wall between their room and the kitchen carried the sound of William's late-night prayers, steady and sure as a heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring them one day closer to the sheriff's deadline. But tonight, at least, they had the comfort of knowing they weren't standing alone. The morning dawned crisp and clear, but neither sister had slept much. Mary's hands shook as she pinned her hair beneath her bonnet, while Ruth smoothed her best calico dress for the 10th time. William had insisted they dress properly for the church hearing, though their plain clothes felt like poor armor against what lay ahead. The wagon ride to town stretched longer than usual. Each rut and bump seemed to echo the sisters' racing hearts. William sat straight-backed on the driver's seat, his quiet presence their only comfort. As they approached the white-painted church, they saw wagons and horses already gathered, and a crowd milling on the steps. Looks like half the county's turned out, Mary whispered, her throat tight. William helped them down from the wagon. Remember, he said softly, you stand in God's house today. Hold your heads high. Inside, morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden pews. The sheriff had arranged a table and chairs at the front, where normally the preacher would stand. Townsfolk filled the benches, their whispers echoing in the high, ceilinged space. William guided the sisters to seats in the front row. Mrs. Harper sat nearby, her spine straight as a ramrod, her face set with determination. Other neighbors who had witnessed their father's past cruelties dotted the congregation, some looking uncomfortable, others resolute. The sheriff entered through the side door, his badge catching the sunlight. He laid out papers on the table, his movements deliberate and formal. The sisters gripped each other's hands so tightly their knuckles went white. The heavy main doors burst open with a bang. Their father stormed down the center aisle, his boots leaving mud on the clean floors. Though his clothes were freshly pressed, his eyes burned with familiar anger. He clutched a stack of papers in one hand. "These are my daughters," he announced loudly, slapping the papers onto the sheriff's table. "I have the documents right here, signed and witnessed. They're my flesh and blood, and I aim to take them home." The sheriff raised his hand for quiet. "This hearing will proceed in an orderly fashion," he said firmly. "Mr. Yoder, please present your witnesses." William stood, his voice steady in the hushed church. "I call Mrs. Harper first." The widow walked to the front, her skirts rustling. She faced the congregation without fear, recounting that day 3 years ago when their father had bragged about selling his daughters. "He was proud of it," she said clearly. "Claimed he got 3 bottles of whiskey and a fine saddle in trade." Their father's face reddened. "She's lying. Those papers prove my right." "Be silent," the sheriff warned, "or you'll be removed." More witnesses came forward. The livery stable owner described how the father had tried to trade Ruth for a horse. A shopkeeper's wife recalled him offering Mary in exchange for settling his debts. With each testimony, the sisters' shoulders hunched further, old shame burning their cheeks. Their father grew more agitated, shouting accusations and denials. His carefully pressed clothes became disheveled as he gestured wildly. "They're mine to do with as I please. The law says a father has rights." William stood then, his tall frame casting a shadow in the morning light. "No man owns another," he said quietly but firmly. "Not even a father. These women are God's children first, and he gave them the same dignity he gives all his creation." The church fell silent. Even the father seemed struck dumb by the simple truth in William's words. The sheriff studied the papers before him, his brow furrowed. The sisters hardly dared breathe. Finally, he looked up. "This is a serious matter requiring careful consideration," he announced. "I will review all testimony and documents overnight. My decision will be delivered tomorrow morning." He fixed the father with a stern look. "Until then, the sisters remain under Mr. Yoder's protection. Any interference will be dealt with harshly." The father stormed out, letting the church door slam behind him. Gradually, the townsfolk filed out, their murmured conversations fading into the morning air. The sisters sat frozen until William gently touched their shoulders. "Come," he said. "We have chores waiting at home." The ride back was silent. Ruth stared at her clasped hands while Mary watched the passing landscape without seeing it. At the homestead, they went through their daily tasks mechanically, feeding chickens, weeding the garden, preparing supper. As evening approached, William lit the Sabbath lamp, its gentle glow filling the kitchen. He opened his Bible, the well-worn pages falling naturally to the Psalms. "Let us pray together," he said softly. The sisters knelt beside their chairs, their hearts pounding with fear and hope. William's steady voice carried them through familiar words of comfort, though their own prayers remained wordless pleas for deliverance. Outside, darkness gathered around the little house, Inside, the lamp's flame danced, casting their shadows on the wall. 3 figures bowed in supplication, waiting for morning's judgment. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold, but the morning brought little peace to the homestead. William moved through his chores with measured steps, each motion deliberate as he fed the livestock and drew water from the well. The usual morning sounds, chickens scratching, the pump's creak, milk hitting the pail, seemed somehow muted under the weight of waiting. Inside the house, Mary and Ruth sat at the kitchen table, their breakfast cooling untouched before them. Every distant hoofbeat made them start. Every crunch of wheels on gravel drew their eyes to the window. Ruth's fingers worried at her apron hem until the thread began to unravel. "Perhaps we should try to work," Mary suggested half-heartedly, but neither sister moved from their vigil. The sun climbed higher, marking the slow crawl toward midday. William had just finished stacking fresh-cut wood when a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. The rumble of multiple horses and wagons grew louder, and soon their father's wagon came into view, flanked by 3 riders on each side. The men were rough-looking sorts, the kind that lingered outside saloons looking for trouble. William set down his axe and walked to stand before the house. The sisters hurried to the doorway, clutching each other's hands as the wagons rolled into the yard. Their father jumped down, his boots raising puffs of dust. His hired men spread out in a loose circle, some fingering gun belts, others twirling rope meaningfully. "Figured I'd save the sheriff some trouble," their father announced, his voice carrying the familiar edge of threat. "These girls are leaving with me today, one way or another." William stood perfectly still, his hands open at his sides. The sheriff has not yet ruled. Until he does, Mary and Ruth remain under my protection. The hired men laughed, ugly sounds that made the sisters shrink back against the doorframe. "Protection?" their father sneered. "What kind of protection can a man offer who won't even carry a gun?" He gestured at William's plain clothes. "Your fancy religious ideas won't stop lead, Yoda." "I will not raise weapons against thee," William said quietly. "But neither will I stand aside." One of the men spat in the dirt. "Reckon we could drag him behind a horse a while, boss." Might change his mind about fighting back. More laughter rippled through the group. Ruth whimpered softly, and Mary pulled her sister closer. Their father paced the yard like a caged animal, kicking at the fresh stacked wood pile. "Last chance, Yoda. Step aside now, or when the sheriff rules my way tomorrow, we'll come back and tear this place apart board by board." William did not move. "The Lord is my shepherd," he said clearly. "I shall not want." The father's face twisted with rage. He grabbed a piece of firewood and hurled it at William, who did not flinch as it thudded into the dirt beside him. For a long moment, violence hung in the air like lightning about to strike. Then the father spat and turned away. "Mount up!" he shouted to his men. "We'll be back tomorrow with the law on our side. Then we'll see how your God protects you." The riders wheeled their horses, raising more dust as they followed their employer down the road. Their mocking laughter drifted back until distance swallowed it. As evening settled over the homestead, William sat heavily in his chair by the stove. For the first time, the sisters saw weariness etched deeply in his face. "I fear," he said slowly, "that peaceful ways may not be enough to turn aside such hatred." Mary stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We could leave tonight," she offered. "Take the wagon and go far away. You've done more than enough for us already." Ruth nodded eagerly. "We wouldn't want harm to come to you or your home because of us." William shook his head. "No, whatever comes, we face it together. Running would only prove their belief that might makes right." He reached for his Bible, its leather worn smooth by years of handling. Let us seek wisdom in God's word." The sisters settled on either side of him as he turned the pages with careful fingers. In the lamplight, his voice rose and fell with the familiar cadences of Scripture. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" The words washed over them like cool water, but sleep proved elusive that night. Mary and Ruth lay in their beds, listening to every night sound, the wind in the trees, an owl's distant call, the settling of the house timbers. In the barn loft, William kept his own vigil, praying for strength to maintain his peaceful ways in the face of violence, and for wisdom to protect those entrusted to his care. The sunrise painted the hills in soft amber as William's wagon rolled toward town. Mary and Ruth sat close together on the wooden seat, their simple dresses freshly pressed, their hearts pounding. William guided the horses with steady hands, though his eyes revealed his own tension. The church stood white against the morning sky, its weathered boards gleaming. Already wagons and riders clustered around it, and townsfolk gathered in clusters, whispering as William's wagon approached. The sisters' father stood apart, his face hard with anger, while his hired men lounged against the hitching posts. Inside the church, morning light streamed through dust-specked windows. The sheriff stood at the front, his badge catching the sun. William led the sisters to a front pew where they perched like nervous birds. Their father stumbled in last, reeking of whiskey despite the early hour. "I've reviewed all testimony," the sheriff announced, his voice filling the hushed space, including statements from multiple witnesses about events from years past. He paused, looking directly at the father. "It's clear that you, sir, already sold your legal rights to these women for whiskey money. You can't sell something twice. Your current claim is void." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The father's face drained of color. His legs seemed to give way, and he collapsed onto a pew, his head dropping into his hands. Great, heaving sobs shook his shoulders, not the fake tears of manipulation, but the broken weeping of a man facing his shame at last. Ruth stood slowly, reaching into her apron pocket. She drew out a small loaf of bread, still warm from that morning's baking. With trembling steps, she approached her father. "Here," she said softly, holding out the bread. Mary rose to stand beside her sister. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she spoke words that seemed to echo in the sacred space. "We forgive you." The church fell absolutely silent. Sunbeams slanted through the windows like God's own witness to this moment of grace. One by one, heads bowed in reverence at this unexpected mercy. The sheriff cleared his throat, visibly moved. "The law will recognize William Yoder as legal guardian to Mary and Ruth," he declared. "They'll remain under his protection, with the full force of the law behind it." The father accepted Ruth's bread with shaking hands, pressing it to his chest as tears continued to flow. In that moment, justice and mercy met in perfect balance, healing old wounds with the power of forgiveness. The evening settled soft and golden over the homestead. Inside the cozy kitchen, Mary ladled steaming stew into 3 bowls, while Ruth set fresh-baked bread on the table. The simple meal carried new meaning tonight, each bite a celebration of their deliverance. William bowed his head in grace, his deep voice gentle in the quiet room. "Lord, we thank thee for this food and for bringing this family together." After supper, William rose and carefully lit the Sabbath lamp. Its warm glow filled the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The 3 sat together in comfortable silence, their faces soft in the mellow light. Peace settled over them like a familiar quilt. Ruth's eyes grew misty as she looked around the humble room. "I never knew what home felt like before," she said softly. "But this is home." Mary reached for her sister's hand, her own voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for bringing us here." William smiled, the lamplight catching in his beard. "You two are no burden," he said quietly. "You are blessings sent by God himself." Outside, crickets filled the summer night with their gentle chorus. Through the window, the barn lantern glowed steady and bright against the darkness, like a beacon of hope. The three bowed their heads together in evening prayer, their shadows merging on the wall, no longer three broken lives, but a family made whole through love and faith. The cricket song drifted through the open window, nature's own hymn of thanksgiving, as they sat together in the warm circle of lamplight, finally and truly home. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.